Welcome back, folks. So we will catch the thread where we left off last time. We had just started looking at this verse 24, and this is a continuation of the previous verse, as one can easily guess from the words that are being used here. Let's go through it. Achedyoyamadhayoyam akledyo shosha evacha nitya sarvagatasthanu achaloyam sanatanaha. Now, this entire chapter is very heavy with Vedantic principles, and verse 16 onwards, we have been seeing that one after another, very lofty thoughts are introduced and discussed. So this is also introducing a couple of these lofty thoughts, and we'll spend some time on it, and you might find interesting some of the concepts that are being said over here. We went over the fact that there are different orders of realities, and that the experiences that we have in one dimension or domain doesn't exactly correlate to a different dimension. And we said that the matter, the world that we interact with, which is mostly comprised of matter, not necessarily, but there is also the emotional side of the world that we interact with. But this matter side of the world, how it is working, operating in a different domain in which the sentient side, the intelligent, the intellectual side is different from where it operates, and therefore it is not directly acting on it. However, there is one very key difference that one needs to take into account. And let me just recite the first part of this shloka, so we can continue talking about it. Achedya, we saw in the previous verse, Nainam Chindanti Shastrani, Nainam Dhati Pavaka. So this is continuation of that. Achedyoyam adhayoyam. Achedya is that which is which cannot be hurt or harmed by weapons. Achedyoyam adhayoyam, that which cannot be burnt. Akledya, that which cannot be wet. Ashosha, that which cannot be dried. This thing, there is more discussion about this. What is this thing and how can one talk about it? So the rest of the shloka talks about that. But the point, that the key difference that I was talking about, is that this is fine, that we understand that there are different orders of realities in which different experiences take place. And just like matter is unable to harm or interact with mind in the sentient part of things, affect it. Similarly, we said that the sentient part is unable to affect matter because of the different orders of reality. So you might, in a dream, you might win a lottery for $1 million, but in real life, you obviously cannot use that currency. So because the order of reality is different, and vice versa, you might be a billionaire in a real life, but in a dream, you might be a pauper, and you want money badly because you are in a whole world of grief, and all this money in your real life, you cannot spend that currency in your dream. And we get the idea. But the key difference that one needs to be aware of is the sentient intelligence part of this subtle side of things. We have seen that when we try to understand the world, there is two parts in the way this analysis is being done. There is the part which is very close to the individual, a very, very personal, private thing. And then there is the part that is universal, cosmic, the world perspective. There are two views in which things are seen. So, in order to understand what matter is, and therefore, by virtue of the fact that we understand how it is, we will be able to work with it better. We will be able to engage with it better. And so the scientific community has done a magnificent job, and there have been geniuses who have come up with how this matter works, and we know how it has been broken down into molecules and atoms and subatomic particles and so on and so forth, till they have come to a point beyond which they are unable to go, at least as things stand. And that is the fundamental building block from which entire matter stands, as it were, and that we interact with. And the spiritual super geniuses that were there, the spiritual scientists that were there, they did an equally wonderful job at analyzing the sentient side of man, or a living being. And then they too were able to progress their research, their analysis, and go down to this most fundamental fabric from which this entire sentient thing can be explained. And the difference, although we say that matter is unable to influence the subtle, the mind part, and vice versa, the key point that we need to take into account is experience that takes place, the intelligence behind that experience. That is a very private, personal, and subtle affair that takes place in the mind. So it is not adequate to just have matter interacting with a subtle neural side of things. So we have got our eyes and ears and all that, but even though the eyes might interact with something visible, it is insufficient for that sole interaction to produce an experience. Whatever it is that is producing experience is its own dimension of reality is there. That is true, but that is one key difference that is there, that stands apart from the analysis that takes place from the material side of the world. Now, having said that, just like the fundamental thing of which matter can be thought of as composed of, and that happens to be energy in some sort. Similarly, there is a fundamental thing of which each and every experience that a person, a human being, a living being has can be stretched to, can be drawn to. And that is, like I said, these spiritual scientists, they have done a wonderful job at doing that analysis. And one might question, supposing you look at what they have done, or you read somewhere and you say, okay, so they have come up with this XYZ thing, and they claim that this is the most fundamental thing of which all experience are made up of. And you say, I think there is something more than that that is there. Well, in that case, then supposing you are able to prove that, then that becomes your fundamental thing. The same thing that happens with matter. Today, whatever the subatomic particles are composed of, that happens to be energy, is where we have reached, and therefore we know. Now, if you are able to, or if there is another some streak of discovery or a strike of genius and something else shows up there, then we have that discovery. So this, it is essential to understand that the nature of this fundamental thing, which on which everything is built, it is strictly non-decomposable. It is the rock core bottom substratum. Everything else is made up of this. That is the thing that we need to grasp. It cannot be decomposed. If it were to be decomposed, then whatever it decomposes into, that becomes the fundamental thing. So that is, we have to stop at a point, or we naturally stop at the point where we encounter or we come across this fundamental thing that you can no longer decompose. In fact, the very definition of atom at one point was the smallest indivisible part of matter. Now we know that it is more than that, and that if time permits, that's we can. There's something about that that I've got to say, but let's see, if time permits, we will do that. So this fundamental thing, you can call it by any name, and the words that one might come across in Sanskrit literature, in the Vedantic literature, is Brahman, Atman, Parameshwar, Ishwar. There's different contexts in which these variations kind of have their own stay. But overall, these words, they get used on and off. And in English, the word that's kind of being used and comes somewhat close to it is consciousness. Consciousness is this core fundamental building block that is used to build any and all kinds of experiences that we living beings experience, go through, encounter. So this thing that is there, this fundamental fabric of, so this existence is a basic requirement for experience. Unless there is existence, the experience needs to have with it this backing of existence for it to be there. So existence is something that comes as part of the experience that we human beings or living beings go through. This can get complicated, so we will go into more details of this depending on the context that we are in. But at this moment, it is enough for us to understand that there is this fundamental, basic, primordial thing. When I use the word primordial, I don't want to betray the idea of something crude. It is not crude. It is something fundamental, and that is called as, we will refer to that as consciousness, which is how you will find in most of the Vedantic lectures that you might hear from others. Consciousness is the word that gets used, but that's kind of a poor word. There isn't a good word that can reflect what the Sanskrit word Brahman means. But we'll use it for now, and we will see its different traits. The very mention of traits of consciousness is it will make a Vedantist skin crawl. That's, from a Vedantic standpoint, that is a very incorrect statement. But at the moment, we are not getting into that. So this fundamental thing, this consciousness, which is unaffected by the material world, these fundamental things. What about it? So this is achedyoyam adhayoyam. It cannot be hurt, it cannot be burnt. These are the basically saying that it doesn't have physical attributes, which is this achedyoyam. This is another way of stating that it does not have physical attributes. Okay. What is the other thing it's talking about? So these are very, very lofty, heavy words, and they are not just being thrown here in general. Each word is so heavy and loaded. It's like there is tons and tons of commentaries and books that have been written on this. They are pregnant with so much of meaning in it. And so we are going to spend some time on it. There's people spend a lot of time on these words, but we are going to spend just some time on it. So Nitya is the word. So the first shloka, the first line of this shloka, we could relate to the previous shloka. Achedyo yamadhayo yamakletyam ashosya eva cha. Eva cha, and eva is certainly, cha is and, eva cha. Nitya, nitya is eternal. So this eternal, this word or everlasting, what it's saying is that consciousness, this fundamental energy, Satchidananda, is another word that's actually kind of comes more closer to what we are talking over here. But that word is actually made up of three words: Sat, Chit, and Ananda, and that will take another bunch of sessions if we start to analyze or understand in the meaning of that word. So we'll not get into that. But what is being discussed here is this fundamental fabric that is there, this consciousness that is there. It is not, everything is composed out of it. It isn't, it cannot be decomposed. It cannot change. So the Vedantic principle in general, philosophical principle, is that if there is change, it implies there is a death. Change is just another name for death. Therefore, if something changes, then that means that it was made up of something and it had something else to become. That's what there are two things involved in this. But since we are saying that this is the fundamental of everything, out of which everything is made, this cannot change. And if it cannot change, then it cannot cease to exist. And if it cannot cease to exist, then it cannot borrow existence and come into existence in the first place. For then it would violate this law of being non-decomposable. So therefore, it cannot come into existence, and nor can it go out of existence. And everything else that is there, that we experience, or that the world is, or that the cosmos is, everything else borrows existence from this fundamental thing, from consciousness. Existence is borrowed from this fundamental energy, from Satchidananda. So if that is the case, if it doesn't come into existence and nor does it go out of existence, so it has been there all the time, which is, if you remember what is being said in the 16th verse, na sato vidyate bhava, na bhavo vidyate satah. That means it is eternal. It has always been there and it will always be there. And very roughly, we can understand this from the first law of thermodynamics that we mentioned last time, where it is stated, it is observed and stated that energy can neither be produced or it cannot be destroyed, but it just changes the energy. But the fundamental nature of energy, it it continues to stay there unperturbed. It is there. That's it. It is there. Okay. So that's the word nitya. And like I said, there is a lot that can be that more that can be said about it. But from this verse perspective, we will look at the next word that is in here, sarvagata sthanu. So अच्छेद्योयम अधायोयम अक्लेद्यो शोष्य एव च नित्य सर्वगत स्थाणु अचलोयम सनातनः. Nitya sarvagata sthanu. Sarvagata sthanu is, if this, that means it's all pervading. But it's not on the face of it, when these words are being thrown around, it's not something like, you are describing someone you have met who is a larger than life kind of person. And then you use all these adjectives to try and communicate to somebody else the greatness of this person. Oh, he's a super genius and he's fantastic and so on and so forth. You use all these big words. That's, we shouldn't take these words in that context. Every word over here has been very thoughtfully put and it has got a lot of meaning behind it. So all pervading, what is the meaning of this? That this consciousness, this Satchidananda, if it needs to be this fundamental supreme thing on which everything else depends and which does not depend on anything, if it needs to not violate this definition, then it cannot have some space to expand into. Otherwise, it will become into something else. It will become, it has to be conditioned in order for it to expand, to occupy some space. If it were shrunk to begin with, and therefore it expands by the mere fact that it needs to do this, it violates this definition of it being the fundamental particle, the fundamental material. So therefore, it has to be all pervading. It is like space. You cannot think of what space might occupy. Everything sits inside space. Space doesn't, if you think of something in which space is there, then that is the ultimate final thing. That is the fundamental thing we are talking. Everything is there as a part of it. The same definition is extended here. The fundamental decomposable nature of this thing. It is there everywhere, all pervading. Sarvagata sthanu. Achalam. Achalam is immovable. Chala is to move. Achala is, you negate it by using the word before that. And you can see that all these words being used, they are actually telling us this fundamental nature of Satchidananda, of consciousness. So consciousness, it cannot move. It's not in a negative sense. It's in a very positive sense. In fact, it's a very definitions of supremeness. Because it is supreme, it doesn't need to move. It is there everywhere. You think it's if the if one were to take a very gross corollary to this or metaphor or comparison to it, it is like the mind, where you you will be you will not be able to think of a thought where the mind is not. You think of something, it is there in that sense. Okay. Nitya sarvagata sthano achaloyam sanatana. Sanatana is similar to eternal. It is everlasting, eternally the same. It is a fundamental thing. It cannot change. If it changes, that's it. It is dead. Whatever things, if that whatever undergoes change, it means it is not supreme. It is going to face death at some point. Okay, let's move on to the next verse. Avyaktoyamachintyoyam avikaryoyamuchyate tasmadevam viditvainam nanoshochitumarhasi. Again, these words that are used here, they are very, very heavy. They are very loaded. So avyakta is a word that gets used to explain the cosmological principles that gets discussed in Vedanta and Veda when understanding creation. And it also is used at a personal, private level to understand how it influences or affects an individual. It's a very common thing that takes place in Vedantic analysis. Vyakta means to manifest. Avyakta means yet to be manifest or in an unmanifested state. That is what it means. Avyaktoyamachintyoyam. Avyaktoyam. So this is in Sanskrit. We have seen several words before where multiple words get joined together and the rules of samasa and sandhi, they come in, and then two words are joined, and in order to understand them you have to use the rules of sandhi and you break them into two words. It's like when I mentioned this earlier, when you say appendicitis, it is appendix and itis. These two words, they get joined together, and then this word itis, which means pain, can be concatenated with any other word, and you get, meningitis and so on and so forth. Similarly, avyakto yamachintyoyam. So ayam is this soul. Avyakto ayam. Avyaktoyam chintyoyam. So that word has been getting concatenated and forming new words out of it. So avyakto ayam. This one is avyaktam, unmanifested. So what is this? So there is this theory, and it's pretty involved, but not that complicated to understand. There is the macrocosm and the microcosm. So macrocosm is the universe in its expanded form, and the microcosm is in its subtle, unmanifested form. So what does it mean? Now, we, by the grace or by the virtue of modern science, now we know that if you take the Richmond, the oak trees in California, redwood trees. These redwood trees, they are 200, 300, 400 feet tall trees. But their blueprint is captured in a DNA. We know that now. So just in the DNA, when you, in the seed of that tree, in the seed of that tree, if you analyze that, you break open the tree in a microscope, you look at it, and you will find that there is the blueprint for the tree. There is this that there are just these 4 proteins, the way they are put together, that decide how this tree is going to turn out to be. This adenine, guanine, cytosine, thymine. There are 4 proteins that go in this DNA strand, and it forms a blueprint, and it is you need a microscope to study it, and it fits, or it is this small. It goes into the seed, which is a few centimeters big in diameter. And so this whole tree's manifestation is actually defined by this blueprint, which is held in the DNA inside of this seed. So when the seed sprouts and the tree comes out, then this blueprint defines the nature of this tree. How tall will it be, and what kind of other characteristics it will exhibit. In fact, I remember it happens even today, that there in India, there there was at one time the cow, they were trying to breed Jersey cows, and if you want to do that, you don't transport a bull or a cow from England, Jersey to India in a plane, whatever is the logistics you might use. What they do is they just fertilize an egg, and that is which is something very small, and they take it inside a test tube, and that's what gets transported. So in this unmanifested form lies the blueprint, the entire expression of how this matter is going to turn out to be. Similarly, this blueprint of our experiences, all our experiences, not just certain subset, but all the experiences, is what is there in this subtle form, in this consciousness, in this Satchitananda, in this soul, whatever this fundamental fabric that is there, it has got this blueprint. And based on that blueprint, experiences arise that we encounter or that we experience. But the blueprint is there inside that. Avyaktoyam. So this is the unmanifested state of the consciousness, is this unmanifested state of experience of life itself, because our life is nothing but a series of experiences. That is what our life is. Okay. Avyaktoyam achintyoyam, achintyoyam, inconceivable. This is one other word, very heavy, very lofty. There is an entire chapter, chapter 13, that is devoted to this one thing. So obviously we'll look into that in great detail when we get there. But we will spend some time on this here. In order for something to become an experience, several things need to happen. It is insufficient for just one side of things to take place for experience to happen. So if we take the case of vision, we see a ball that has been kept on a table, and light, which is an electromagnetic radiation, it falls, a photon of light, it falls on this object, and then it reflects from the object and goes into the eyes. And we'll take a very basic case here. We are not talking about experience vision, that is that we cannot view. What I mean is the visible spectrum, because this photon of light that enters our eye, it has to be of sufficient energy, otherwise vision doesn't take place. If the room is somewhat dark, a cat or a dog could see things, but we cannot, because in their nervous system, the energy of the light that enters their eye, they are able to synthesize and process that low amount of energy, and then we are not, and so on and so forth. But so we'll keep this simple, that we'll assume a very favorable case that light falls and it enters the eye. So point the point till which light hits the eye and it enters the eye, till that point we are talking about a world that sits outside the sensory organs. Once light goes inside the eye, and then something happens and the electric energy becomes chemical energy, becomes electrical energy, and then there is a series of frequency of pulses that get sent along the nerve to the optical center where vision takes place. And a lot of work has been done on that. But so there is this part where light has fallen on this object, entered our eye, and that's it. Then the job of this external world is over. After that, things have started happening inside the world, inside our eye. So in theory, this light that falls on the eye, and when it enters the eye, it generates a particular waveform which gets interpreted and vision takes place. So in theory, if we are able to manufacture this waveform inside the eye without that object being present there, we would be able to see that object. This is a whole different discussion, but just to point out the nature of experience that is there. So this section, there is a set of processes, tasks that need to happen before vision takes place. So the first task is done. Light has fallen on the object, entered the eye. And then from the eye, something has happened, task 2 takes place, and then 4, 5, 6, 7 tasks takes place. And then finally, inside the brain, something happens, and whatever happens, it gives rise to an experience. And that is where a vision takes place. So fundamentally, there is the need for interaction of this consciousness, this intelligence that we have, in order to interact with this external, something that is not it, in order for it to become that object, so that we get the feeling of this experience. But the stimuli that this external world is providing, those are the source of our experience. But this consciousness itself, there is no stimuli coming from it for it itself to work on it. It's kind of convoluted. It's like you have got a torchlight and you want to now shine the torchlight on the torchlight itself. You cannot do that. You can use the torchlight to shine it on something else. You cannot use it to shine it on itself, which is what it's being said here. You cannot think of it because it is because of that that you think. So you cannot think of it. And when we'll say this is a bit tricky, and it has been expounded a lot in later chapters, so even if it is a bit confusing now. So avyakto yamachintyoyam avikaryoyam uchyate avikaryoyam. Vikar is to change. Avikar is not change. It's a continuation of some of these words that we have seen. And again, this is one of these other lofty words that is there. And I would we would get into details of it in some other chapter, because this verse might take much longer if I start getting into each and every word into this level of detail. Okay. Avikaryoyam avyaktoyam achintyoyam avikaryoyam uchyate. Uchyate is said. So it is like this has been said, whatever avyaktoyam, that this is unmanifested, that this is inconceivable, that this is unchangeable, this has been said, is what that line means. Tasmad, therefore, evam, tasmad evam viditvainam nanu shochitum arhasi. Therefore, knowing this thing, nano shochit, shocha is to grieve, nano is not to. Therefore, knowing this consciousness to be avyakta, achinta, avikaryam, Arjuna, you should not grieve. Yeah, I'm paraphrasing it because the Sanskrit here is the words mean slightly different. It's like you do not deserve to grieve, but the right paraphrasing here is you should not grieve, oh Arjuna. So let's not forget that Krishna is telling all this to Arjuna, the battlefield, because he has been overwhelmed by this situation and has lost his drive to fight. And so Krishna is giving him all this background and explanation and telling him that he need not grieve. If you remember from the first chapter, Arjuna Vishada Yoga, and almost 10 verses of the second chapter, Arjuna is grieving, lamenting that I cannot bear, I will not be able to watch my guru and my relatives being killed. And so in response to that, Shri Krishna is telling that you should not grieve, because what you are saying, there's a fallacy in it, that the real consciousness, the real Satchidanand that is there is imperishable, and therefore your thinking that they would die is incorrect. And we have been saying that this has two perspectives. One is the actual physical interpretation of what is happening on the battlefield. And one can imagine Arjuna with his bow and arrows sitting there, given up, and Krishna explaining to him he does not need to do that, and that at one point he is going to lift back his bow and arrow and plunge into the battlefield. This is one perspective. And the other perspective that we have explained earlier is all this is happening in the mind. So there are aspects of this that may not exactly apply to the battlefield, but they definitely apply to the battle that is going on in our mind. So this aspirant, this sadhaka, this person who is trying to get some peace in his mind. There are so many thoughts that are running in his brain, in his mind, and they are leaving him all unsettled, unperturbed, and he is desperately trying to seek for peace. And in doing so, he is trying to analyze what is this that is happening in my mind. This aspirant is trying to look at this. What is happening in this mind? What is this thought that has come up? From where did it come up? And what is it doing? How big did this thought become? How in what is the intensity with which it has affected me? This aspirant is analyzing this. He's looking into his mind and he's analyzing it. And when he's doing this analysis, it is not a trivial effort. After the first attempt, second attempt, he realizes it's not easy. And then he, with great determination, he again sits down and begins to watch his thoughts, what is happening. And, and he is determined at this time that I will definitely find out why such and such an incident has affected me so badly is not the word I want to use, but unsettled me. And I should not be disappointed. There's no need for me to get sad if because of certain incident, but I am sad. And why is that? And so he's trying to look into that, and with great determination, he wants to see what is happening, and he is unable. He is super frustrated. Again and again and again he attempts. And all these Bhishmacharyas and Dronacharyas and Duryodhanas, they are coming into his mind. They are standing in front of him, and they do not let him understand what is happening here in all this chaos. It's like you there is a paper. We are way over time, but just one quick metaphor. Yes, there's a paper and there is a bunch of colored pens that have been given to you, red and blue and green and whatnot, and you just take one by one and you scribble on this page with all these different colors. And then somebody tells you, now you trace out the red color for me. And you are trying in all your sincerity, but they have just gotten mixed up, and it's very difficult to figure out which is red. Maybe you see a little bit of red here, and then you try to trace it down and it gets lost somewhere, and then you try again and again, and it's frustrating. And so that situation of this aspirant, Sri Krishna is answering that frustration that an aspirant is facing, that it is there. There is a fundamental thing that is there, that is behind or under or at the heart of all these thoughts and experience that are running through your mind. And you should not get lost in watching these thoughts and experience, but rather try and draw your attention to something more fundamental. Not these thoughts that affect you, but what is making up this thought. That's the teaching that Sri Krishna is imparting to Arjuna or an aspirant at this time. We are way over time, so we will continue from this verse next time. So thanks for listening, and till next time, have a nice weekend. Bye.